Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hello, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I'm a senior lecturer at Bath Spa University, an associate lecturer at the Open University, and an independent speaker, writer and consultant for critical early years. Now, throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting Oracy in primary and early years settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. This week, I'm delighted to introduce Louisa Reeves as our guest. Welcome to the podcast, Louisa. How are you today?
Hi, Shaddai. Thanks for having me. I'm really well.
Brilliant. Just before we get into the topic of this week's discussion, perhaps you could just give a short introduction to yourself for our listeners.
Yes, so I'm Louisa Reeves. I'm Director of Policy and Evidence at Speech and Language UK, and we're a children's charity that supports children and young people who struggle with talking and understanding words. And I'm a speech and language therapist by professional background.
Excellent. So in this third episode, we're looking at how to develop Oracy teaching skills and what practitioners can practically do to learn more about developing those communication and language skills of young people. I think I'm curious about what you said in previous episodes about speech and language still in today's society, perhaps not being understood as much as it could be by practitioners. So maybe that's a good place to start as to why that is the case, and then we can go into what perhaps they could be doing to better develop their knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for adults who are good at communicating, and you don't get to be a teacher unless you are quite a good communicator, although some young people might have a different view, is that it's really hard to reflect on how hard it is to develop those skills. I sometimes talk about, learning to drive a car, and you forget how difficult it is to, do all the mirrors and the gear stick and everything else. Once you're driving, you kind of get from A to B and you don't really think about the mechanics of it. So I think a lot of teachers and teaching staff assume that language skills are kind of done by the time a child starts in school. So, by 5, they'll get all the talking under their belt. We can just carry on with the literacy and the maths and all the other curriculum areas. And I think they often overlook the fact that language takes a bit longer to develop, and it develops over time. So the language that, you have at 15 is very different from the language skills you have at 5. Some children are, just struggle with developing those skills, and I think schools quite often don't take that into account and don't spend enough time making sure that those underlying speech and language skills are there in place before they build on the other curriculum areas, or they start behaviour management policies, or they even bring in interventions that are designed to support other difficulties, when actually speech and language should be the first approach.
Yeah, it's a really good point you're making there about speech and language skills not being completed by the child reaches primary school. I guess I'm wondering about what are those practical things teachers can be doing in the classroom. We've come a long way from children being seen and not heard, but are we in a position now where children are really having that voice to participate in the classroom environment as much as perhaps they should be, according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, that makes clear that children should have a voice? Is that being enacted in practice in today's schooling context, and what more can teachers be doing?
Yeah, I think it's hard for teachers to do that. I think it's hard for a number of reasons. I think there's a lot of pressure on the curriculum, and we know that we've got a review of the curriculum, the Francis Review, that's ongoing at the moment. We have heard that there will be more emphasis on Oracy in the final recommendations of that review, and I think that I hope will provide space for schools to really think about how to support children's speech and language and communication skills as part of their Oracy approach. I mean, interestingly, when we survey teachers, about half of them say they don't have enough training in speech and language development, and in how to support it. So, I think if you don't know, you don't know, do you? If you haven't had that as part of your training, it's not in initial teacher training, and barely get special educational needs covered, let alone speech and language skills. And yet, speech and language skills are such a key area of development for children and young people. So I think what teaching staff can do is they can look at training opportunities. So we have a short online course available on our website that you can do for free, and that's for anybody who works with children and young people at any age, and it's a really kind of basic introduction to speech, language and communication, how you can split those three areas of kind of talking and understanding words up and start to sort of think about where children and young people might be struggling. But we have a number of other resources where you can just have sort of hints and tips for how to adapt your own teaching practice, how you communicate as an adult. And so quite often when we're in front of a group of children, we kind of rush to fill that silence. So there is something around pausing, around allowing children more processing time, thinking about how you ask questions. So you might say, oh, Shaddai, in a minute I'm going to ask you a question about, trigonometry in this problem. Then you might talk a bit more, and then you might come back and say, Shaddai, have you had a chance to think about that? What might your answer be? Just so you're allowing some thinking time. And we know that all children value that as well, but particularly those with speech and language challenges.
So I'm hearing that there are some things that can be done within our teaching context on a daily basis, but that training is really important. And if teachers can go away and access that, perhaps through your organisation or other resources, that's a really valuable step in making sure that they have that understanding of the importance of speech and language for a young child. For me, that also feeds into behaviour management, and I'm curious on your perspectives on that and what teachers might need to be doing in terms of how they think about behaviour management through a positive lens around speech and language differences.
Yes, absolutely. So we use language a lot to moderate our own behaviour and our own kind of well-being, because they're very connected, aren't they? But we also, as adults, use language to try and moderate children's behaviour. And if you have a speech and language challenge, particularly we know there's a correlation between developmental language disorder and mental health and behaviour. And so we know about 80% of children who have an SEMH, if you like, label, have a speech and language challenge, but also about 45% of children who are referred to child and adolescent mental health services have a speech and language challenge as well. So there's a big intersection between language, between behaviour and mental health. And I think teachers need to be aware of that link. So you need to be looking and thinking, is this child actually struggling with speech and language? That needs to be kind of your first port of call. So there are tools available from Speech and Language UK, but from other kind of reputable sources to identify need. But also in terms of how we relay behaviour rules, if you like, to children. So using visual support, having consistent rules so that it's not a different process as you move from class to class or from year to year, a consistent approach across the school, one that is made easily accessible. So if you struggle to understand, you can have those rules explained and reinforced. But the other side of that is that some of those interventions around behaviour use a lot of language. So we might ask a child to say, tell me what happened. What were you thinking? Why did you behave in that way? And that requires quite a lot of language to process that, and also to relay what happened. So I think there are some very early interventions that schools can look at. And we've got a suite of interventions at Speech and Language UK called Talk Boost that are available at different ages that really look at that. Not just the speech and language skills that children need for learning, but also those broader communication skills you need for behaviour and for managing kind of peer relationships, but also how you interact with adults as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a really useful resource for teachers to go and engage with. Now, something that's on everyone's minds at the moment when it comes to young people is social media, digital technology. Do we ban it? Do we allow it? I'm really curious about your position, what you would say to teachers who are likely facing concerns from parents about the amount of time, or perhaps not, their child is spending on different forms of digital technology and later in schooling social media.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Because social media is, it's here to stay. As adults, we're never very far away from our phones. I think a lot of young children see their parents using their phones a lot, and it's kind of, it's currency, it's out there. The impact on young people, as we know, can be, really quite significant and disastrous. And, there's some new legislation just being enacted to try and protect young people. But we also know that is how young people engage with their peers. That's how they talk to each other. That's how they develop their interaction skills. So I think, like everything, it's about empowering young people and empowering teachers and parents to make some really informed decisions. We've seen schools. I'm actually a trustee of a group of schools where in the secondary school they've decided to ban phones during the school day, and they have seen young people communicating more with each other. So, at break times, at lunchtime, just more talk, and they found more talk in the classroom as well. But at the same time they've done that, they've also done quite a lot of work on how people interact with each other, how you might use your language skills to kind of filter what you're seeing, to kind of be able to challenge people who have very different views from you, have those conversations. So I think it's not as a kind of, yes, no, yes, ban them all, no, it's free for all. But I think it is nuanced, and it is about having the knowledge and the skills and being able to make a kind of reasoned judgment about, what I'm seeing, what I'm doing with my phone, but also very much providing young people with other opportunities to interact and to talk and to get the help and support that they need.
Thinking from an early years perspective for parents with children from birth to 5, what would you say to them in terms of the most appropriate age and duration for their child to begin to interact with iPads, YouTube, all that sort of stuff? What's your kind of general guidance on that?
Yeah, so there is some really strong guidance from the World Health Organization, actually, and we've got quite a lot of information on our website for families who want to know more about screen time. For babies and toddlers, I would say, don't use it unless you are looking at something together, very briefly, and really think about what it is that your young child is watching. So there are some great online resources that are specifically designed for particular age groups. We would always say, watch it with your child or talk to your child about what they've seen, really immediately afterwards. Just don't just give them a screen and let them loose on anything. Some of the cartoons and things that are designed to really sort of, attract babies and young children, they're not going to learn from that. I think that's really important for families to understand that children aren't really going to pick up very much, particularly when they're very young, from screens. It is a form of kind of, keeping them quiet in many ways, and we all need to do that from time to time with our young people. But actually, it's not a learning tool in the way that talking to you as an adult, spending time interacting with a real person will do. But actually, if that interaction is on a screen, if you're looking something on a screen together, if you're talking about it, then I think that's great. But monitor your own use as an adult as well as how much you're using it with your child, and just be there with your child, when you can be, so that you're having those real-time face-to-face interactions with them.
Yeah, so it sounds like if it's used in a supported way with the child in a meaningful manner, then it can be appropriate to an extent. But by and large, there are so many other ways to support a young child's communication and language skills. I guess my final question is feeding into that is around the value of a language-rich environment. That's something we hear quite a lot when we talk about classrooms, and I'm curious about your understanding of that term, what a language-rich environment looks like, and how that might be different to going into a classroom and seeing a language-poor environment. What are those key differences, and what might teachers need to do to move towards a more language-rich environment?
Yeah, so I think it's really about thinking about having things to talk about, so things that are stimulating but not overstimulating. So we do go into some very busy classrooms where things are dangling from the ceiling and plastered all over the walls, and actually that's quite confusing, I think, and for children who are neurodiverse, a very visual, very stimulating environment is going to be quite challenging. So I think thinking very carefully about what you have on your walls and what you have kind of out for little people to interact with is really important, and change it, because as human beings we get very used to visual things. We stop seeing them after a while. It's always the bane of advertisers' lives is that once you've been past it a couple of times you're not going to really notice it. So think about what you have out, relate it to what you are learning about, or what your current focus is, so that children can do some of their own experiential learning and interaction with things and talk about things. I think primarily in terms of communication, it's about how adults use their own communication. So, how do you communicate with children? Do you allow them space? Do you make sure that the ones who aren't coming to you for a chat also have that opportunity? And I do think, one of the things about, we haven't talked about kind of gender, particularly in early years, but we know that boys can struggle more with their communication skills than girls. And that's not necessarily a boy thing, but I think sometimes it is the context of early years environments. So they tend to be largely female dominated, and there tends to be sort of quiet corners where you could do construction things or interactive play, and then there's kind of outside on the bikes. And quite often I'll go to places and see that all the boys are outside on the bikes, which is great, but get out there with the boys on the bikes and talk to them and listen to the language they're using. So take advantage of those opportunities. We sometimes advise early years settings to do a sort of bit of an observation where you do hot spots and cold spots. So which areas of your setting, is there lots of chat? Is there lots of talking? Is that talking child to child? Is it child to adult? But where is it quite quiet? Where are you not seeing that interaction? Can you think about how to introduce language into that environment? So those are all things that I think are really supportive of a communication environment. We talked a little bit about languages other than English. Have those perhaps on display. Have little bits of writing that you can then talk about. Have visual support, maybe a timetable where you've got pictures of this is what we're going to do now, this is what we're going to do next, so that you can just guide children through the day. Pictures on things so that they know how to put things away, just so that they can have that kind of support for their communication skills and their learning more broadly.
Absolutely, and all of this connects into the curriculum, which we'll save for our fourth and final episode. But for now, it's been really useful for our listeners to hear about those practical strategies that practitioners can implement to better support young children's communication and language skills. We had a good conversation about behaviour management, the importance of using digital technology in a responsible manner with the children, and also we've spoken about, as you've just said, some really useful ways to think about communication and language-rich environments. So some excellent takeaways there. Thanks so much, Louisa.
Thank you.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Louisa, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Dr. Shaddai Tembo, and Louisa Reeves. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, Don't forget, you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your setting and links to relevant resources.